All right. Our guest today is Bert Spector. Bert is an associate professor in international business and strategy here at the DeMoore McKim School of Business. His research interests include management and organizational history, leadership, organizational change, and business model innovation. Professor Spector is active in executive education and educating companies on issues relating to organizational effectiveness and change. He is co-director of the FBI's Emerging Executive Program and has worked with companies including Bowen Financial Communications, Gillette, CGG Veritas, Arbella Insurance, James River, Motorola, the Coloplast of North America, to name a few. He is a prolific writer in the fields of organizational change. He has co-authored or authored 6 books, many of which have been translated into multiple languages. His articles have appeared in publications including the Harvard Business Review, Sloan Management Review, European Management Journal, Academy of Management Executive, Human Resource Management, and Enterprise and Society. He is recipient of the Johnson Smith Knisely Award for New Perspectives in Executive Leadership, a Best Paper Award from the Academy of Management, and a research grant from the National Science Foundation. He is currently working on an intellectual history of business leadership discourse, Leadership, Discourse, and Meaning, to be published in Cambridge University Press, 2015. Please join me in welcoming Bert Spector.
There you go, sir. Thank you. Let me get my timer started here. Hi, everyone. You mind if I move around a little bit? So, as George said, I teach business strategy, mainly in the DeMoore McKim School. It's a senior level required course. So those of you who are here today, who are in the School of Business, I will likely see you in a couple of years. Looking forward to it. And you might hear a version of this talk again. Sorry about that. As you can see here, I'm going to be talking about one of our favorite companies, Dunkin Donuts. And not because they are the best company to pick, but I just find them interesting because we all know Dunkin Donuts. We all understand a little bit about Dunkin Donuts. And at the same time, I think I can teach you something about Dunkin Donuts that you may not have known. So that's why I picked Dunkin Donuts. When George asked me to do this, the question was, what the hell do I know about design? And I'm still not entirely sure I know the answer to that question, but I can tell you this, that I started thinking about the question of strategy from a design perspective, which is, I think it'd be fair to say, not how we typically think about strategy. But thanks a lot, George. You kept me up at night thinking about how can I frame strategy as a design challenge? And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. But before I do, let me just give you a very brief when I use the word strategy, that's a word we all hear a lot. We may even use it a lot. But what does it mean? And in a business context, what we mean by strategy, this is at a very broad, general level, is how do companies choose to compete with each other and set themselves apart from each other? Okay? How does Dunkin Donuts separate itself from McDonald's or from Starbucks or from, what's the other, Tim Horton. Tim Horton. Or Krispy Kreme is another, put in your favorite donut company there. How does Northeastern separate itself from its competitors? Every business has a strategy. Some organizations are more explicit about their strategy. Some organizations understand it better, but every business has a strategy. I'm not used to slides projecting this big. So I feel like when I see something this big, there should be something really important up there. And I'm not sure whether this is worth being so big, but here it is anyway. in business, we think about strategy as existing in two different spheres. We call it strategy formulation and strategy implementation. And what we mean there is that somebody gets paid in most businesses, and other than small businesses, in most large organizations, somebody gets paid, it may even be you when you graduate here, somebody gets paid to think about what our strategy should be. That's called strategy formulation. And in the College of Business, or in any College of Business, we teach all sorts of tools that you can use, you can apply to designing, I think the word we would use is formulating, creating a strategy. And then once somebody creates this strategy, it gets thrown at the organization, and then we say, all right, you implement it. You do what it takes to make this strategy successful. When the strategy is not successful, of course, the question is always, well, whose fault was it? The implementers say, you gave us a stupid, unimplementable strategy. And of course, the designers say, we gave you a great strategy. What the hell did you do with it? You screwed it up. So I'm going to make the argument that design, I don't know much about architecture, but I do know I think I can make the following statement, and that is when you design a building, if the building can't stand up, stay standing up, and serve the functions for which it was created, you have not created a successful design. Is that a fair statement? Are you with me on this one? You're not sure about that. Well, all right, I think I'm going to make the argument that it is. And therefore, why not apply that same thinking to strategy? And instead of this crazy thinking that first we formulate a strategy and then we turn it over to other people to design the strategy, why not think about strategy as a design challenge? And that is to say, look, implementation, formulation, it's all part of the same process. If you create a strategy that is not implementable, you have failed. So let's think about strategic design as an organic whole rather than two separate activities. George, I hope that works. That's as good as I could do about organizational design. But here's one quick lesson on strategy. To be a little more specific, I said strategy is about how companies differentiate themselves from each other. Here's a very quick way of thinking about a business strategy. Think about a business strategy as addressing three questions. Every well-designed business strategy must address three questions. It has to do more, granted, but it must address three questions. Who, what, how? You should be able to go in any business. And by the way, when I say any business, any organization. It could be Northeastern. George mentioned I spent 5 years working in the FBI. It could be the FBI. It could be any organization. And you should be able to answer three questions. Who, what, how? What is it that we're selling? What's our product, service, offer? What value are we creating? What is Northeastern selling? By the way, we could have some debates about this. It's not always that clear. What is Northeastern selling? What is Dunkin Donuts selling? What is the FBI selling? That was one of the great debates we got into, is what exactly is the FBI selling? But so who means who are you selling it to? Who's your intended customer? When I say this to students, they will often say to me, well, in a business, you're not turning away customers. Isn't your who anybody who wants to buy your product? And the answer to that is, not really. Not really. You have certain specific target markets that you're aiming for. You're not necessarily, or you're not even usually going to say, I'll sell to anybody. So my students say, well, what about Amazon? Isn't Amazon selling just about anybody who wants? Yes. Yes, Amazon is. So there are a few companies that will say we're selling to anybody. But to prove to you that companies are not trying to sell to anybody, my experience, when I go to the mall, which is as rare as I could possibly make it, but when I'm walking through the mall, You know, what's the clothing store? Abercrombie and Fitch? How many of you shop at Abercrombie and Fitch? All right, George, are you one of them?
I'm not.
No, I'm not either. I'm not either. And not only am I not an Abercrombie shopper, they don't want me. Isn't that true? They don't want me to walk in their store. They make that perfectly clear. You walk by an Abercrombie and Fitch in a mall, and what do you see? All the windows are black. Loud, obnoxious noises occurring from the inside. What else? So I have two daughters. They're grown up now, but when they were younger, I occasionally would mistakenly wander in there to shop with them. And you're greeted. You've been in these stores. You're greeted with pictures of naked teenagers. Isn't that true? And that just makes me, or people of my generation, very uncomfortable. So my first inclination, of course, is to turn around and leave. And as far as Abercrombie & Fitch is concerned, that's great. That's great. They don't want me, I don't want them. So they're not trying to appeal to everybody. If I go in and say I want to buy a shirt, I guess they would sell it to me, but they're not really aiming for me. So does that make sense? So you always have to think about who your target market is. So I don't know if you can tell by the way I'm dressed, but my store of choice, clothing store of choice, is Brooks Brothers. And as my daughters got married, I would say to my son-in-laws, go to Brooks Brothers and shop. And they would look at me like I had three heads. And occasionally, even when they went into Brooks Brothers, they said, oh, I was so uncomfortable, they didn't really want me there, etc. So all businesses, except maybe Amazon, have target markets that they're trying to appeal to. So that's the who, there's the what, and then the how. How are we going to get the product to the market and make profit for the company? That's the business model. I don't know if you noticed that. I do research in business model. That's where the business model resides. And so what I want to talk about today is I'm just going to use Dunkin Donuts, which we all think we know very well, as an example of how this works in reality, what a well-designed strategy looks like. All right? Now, everybody is familiar with this. This is the current Dunkin Donuts logo. Now take a look at that for a second. I know this is not a participation, raise your hand kind of class, but just take a look at that and ask yourself the following question. What's going on there? What is Dunkin Donuts selling you? Now, the first thing I notice from this logo, and by the way, if you just go down to the local Dunkin Donuts in Richards Hall, and you see, this is what you'll see. This is their current logo. And the first thing I notice, I don't know about you guys, but the first thing I notice is that there is no donut. Why not? Yes, what they're clearly selling here is coffee. And you can tell it from the picture and the slogan. America does not run on donuts. We're pretty sure about that one. America runs on caffeine. Okay? So right away we have a sense of what this strategy is all about. Now we're going to explore that a little bit. This is where Dunkin Donuts started. Now, to be completely true, I don't know that this is the picture of the actual Dunkin Donuts double wing van, but it is a picture of a double wing van. So play along. Are we all right on that? Play along. Pretend like this is the original Dunkin Donuts. This is how they started. Right after World War II, a guy named Bob Rosenberg, he would take this van, and supposedly he invented the double wing van. I don't know how much of an invention is that. There was already a single wing van, and he added a second wing. All right, big flipping deal, but he invented this. But what's interesting about the fact, so he would go down, if you're from Boston, he would go down to the docks in South Boston, okay? And that's who he sold to. He would sell out of one side, he would sell sandwiches, and out of the other side, he would sell donuts and coffee. And that's why this is a significant symbol of the early strategy, because he learned very quickly that he was selling a lot more stuff out of one side than the other. Okay? So he then took his idea and said, I'm going to create a bricks and mortar store. I doubt if they call it a bricks and mortar store. We only use that phrase now because we compare it to the internet. By the way, how many of you noticed Amazon has just opened a bricks and mortar store? Have you noticed that? In Manhattan. That is not, don't believe what you read in the press, that is not a retail store. They didn't open that store to sell books. Okay, they opened that store purely to distribute goods. So it's more like a warehouse in a sense, but it's in New York and it's a store. Anyway, so Mr. Rosenberg opened, I'm sorry for the blurriness, but this is the original Dunkin Donuts store in Quincy. And by the way, that picture up there, you're going to trust me on this one, that's the first donut he ever made. So it isn't. But my wife, who is from the Boston, I'm not, so I didn't grow up with Dunkin' Donuts, but she claims she remembers those original donuts. And what you notice about that donut is it has a handle on it, and because it was made to dunk in coffee. All right? The other thing, a couple of other things you might notice, look at the way Dunkin' is spelled, and then look at the way, you know, that is not the way you spell donuts. Did you know that? I'm not even sure I could tell you how donuts is really spelled. I think there's an OU somewhere in there. I'll bet you if most of you, if you saw the word donut spelled out, you would say, what the hell is that? I don't know that word. So this has become, I think, this, but anybody, again, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but can you think of why he might have done this? Why he came up with the misspelling? His reasoning was he wanted the letters to be big, but he didn't want too many letters. So he made that sign himself, and so he came up with, and he said, well, what do you do with a donut with a handle on it? You dunk it in coffee. So what you see already is an evolving strategy. One that started by offering at a truck on the dock, and now he moves to a store. All right? Strategies, the two things we should know about there are many things, but two of the things we should know about strategies is they must change over time. They must be adaptive, they must change over time, but you can't change them all the time. A company that changes its strategy every month, every year, is probably going to be in trouble. A company that never changes its strategy is called Blockbuster. So you got to change, you do have to adapt, okay? And we always, I know students often think about how the internet has been such a disruptive force in retailing, and it has been, but we tend to think that it's the only time that retailing has ever been disrupted. And of course it's not true, and this is another clear example of moving from a little truck to moving toward a sit-down store. By the way, his original stores all had porcelain and china. Over time, he did a couple of things in terms of redesigning and readapting his strategy. One was he went to what we call franchising. Now, again, I suspect most of you have heard the word franchising or franchise. I think most people know what we mean when we say a franchise, and that is Dunkin' Donuts doesn't own the Dunkin' Donuts stores. Dunkin' Donuts owns the brand, Dunkin' Donuts owns the formula, Dunkin' Donuts owns the intellectual property. Dunkin' Donuts does not own the store. Somebody else does. You follow that? That somebody is the franchise owner. Okay? So very early on, Mr. Rosenberg decided he was going to franchise. The reason businesses some businesses, like the franchise, is it allows you to get capital from other people. It's not all your money. You get other people to build the buildings, to spend the money. So in theory, the franchising should work in the following way, that you can grow faster, you can get more spread out because you're not investing all your capital. So Mr. Rosenberg immediately went to franchising, and he created this logo. Now, if you compare this logo, did I do this here? Compare this logo to this logo, and of course what you notice, lots of donuts. This is a donut guy. All right? There is a cup of coffee there. I don't know if you can tell. He is dipping himself in a cup of coffee. But this is Mr. Donut here. Now, you go to today's, this is just a picture of today's Dunkin Donuts. Why, again, I'm not going to ask you to raise your hand, but think about for a moment, what's the advantage of selling coffee over selling donuts? The answer is, in business, we would use the term profit margin. You make a lot more money selling hot water than you do selling donuts. The profit margins are much greater in coffee than they are in donuts. I just saw it, and I don't know if any of you saw this, but in the Boston Globe, what percentage, again, just think for a moment, what percentage of Dunkin' Donuts revenue would you guess today comes from donuts? Just think about that for a second. Write in your head a number. Okay? If that number is greater than 10%, you're wrong. 6% of the revenue comes from donuts. That's it. That's it. 8%. So make me a liar for 2%. So, question, does Dunkin' Donuts have a well-designed strategy? I mean, to me, yes. The answer is yes. All of the elements fit together. Their logos, their merchandising, their franchising, it all fits together. Now, I know 20 minutes goes by fast, George, doesn't it? I'm almost done, but I want to show you one other point here. When we talk about design in business, we mean a lot of things. We mean product design, right? We mean a lot of things. Some design elements in business are protected. I think you're going to have somebody speaking to you soon about intellectual property. Is that true? You might. But it's an interesting, interesting topic is what can you protect? When you're a chain, the goal of when you design your buildings, every Dunkin' Donuts looks alike, right? And the purpose of physical design in a chain is you want all of your stores to look the same, and you want them all to look different from other stores. You want Dunkin' Donuts to be distinguishable from Tim Hortons or from Krispy Kremes. Okay? It becomes even more important, by the way, when you have a franchise because you don't own them. Now, I want to show you something here. Has anybody ever been to a Dippin' Donuts? They are real. This is a real thing, and they really exist in South Boston. Not only do they really exist, but they actually have taken over old Dunkin' Donuts stores and barely changed them. And look at the way they spell Dippin'. Look at the way they spell donuts. Now, this up here in the upper left, that is a legally protected design. It's called trade dress in the world of IP. Trade dress. The way a store looks, the company gets to own. And for the reason that we just talked about, you want to be able to distinguish your store from other stores. Now look down here. Anybody, any lawyers, any future lawyers in the room? Can that possibly? I don't even know. I don't have it. This is a real question. This is not a rhetorical question. I don't really know. Can that possibly be legal? So far, they're still operating. I'm just waiting for the boom to fall on Dippin' Donuts. So, final point, let me just make it, and then I'll turn myself over to George's questions. Think about, every business needs a strategy. You need a strategy to distinguish yourself from your competitors. How do I beat my competitors? It is important, it is, I think, vital for a business to understand its strategy and to be able to execute its strategy. So a well-designed strategy means both that it's distinguishable from your competitors and that it is executable. And one final point, George, I was thinking about this morning as I was driving in, is the following. Just because a business has a well-designed strategy, does that mean it's going to be a successful business? And my answer to that would be no. A well-designed strategy is necessary but not sufficient. You can have a well-designed bad strategy. Blockbuster, border books, well-designed but bad. Bad because they were not adaptive. They were not able to change their strategies over time. So here's what I would say. Just because you have a well-designed strategy does not mean necessarily you're going to be successful. If you do not have a well-designed strategy, I would argue over time you're going to fail. You might be successful for a short period of time because you've got a neat product, something really cool that customers want, but that's not going to sustain you over time. Over time, you need a well-designed strategy to be successful. That's it. Thank you very much.
Well, that was fantastic, and I especially like that you closed with the sort of notion of synthesis, that you've got to you not only have to have a strategy, but you have to have a strategy for change.
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. I think in some ways, you know, I love. By the way, I love the Dunkin Donuts example. It really does tie graphic design, identity in with business strategy, which is, I think, something we've touched on a few times in this course already. But I wanted to, if it's okay, I'd like to focus on the design of change, because when it comes to organizations, you certainly have a lot of experience with, and maybe we can even talk about the FBI example as a starter, but when situations do change, when you do have to change your strategy, as you say, you don't want to be doing it every year, but what was the change in circumstance that meant that the FBI had to completely reevaluate what it was doing, and how did you help them think about that?
Yeah, so think about the FBI before. Oh, look, what was the change? It was 9/11. That was the. What you see. I've studied a lot of strategic changes in organizations, and what you typically see, we call it a trigger event. That the world gradually changes around you, but at some point something particular happens that forces you to reconsider your strategy. Sometimes it's a new technology like the internet. Sometimes it's the opening of new markets like China. So 9/11 was pretty dramatic, obviously, but that changed their world overnight. The FBI, prior to 9/11, saw themselves essentially as a the federal law enforcement agency. We catch bad guys. Okay? If J. Edgar Hoover could have had a slogan, that would have been it. All right? We catch bad guys. Now, I had lots of arguments with J. Edgar about who he defined as bad guys, you know. But that's what they saw themselves as being. Well, that didn't work after 9/11, and because one of the interesting things about the FBI is a week, I think it was just 1 week before 9/11, they got a new director. FBI doesn't get new directors all the time. They get them every, I think, 9 years. Yeah. So they had a new director, 1 week, next week, 9/11, and he said, we were now going to be a national security organization. That is to say, catching bad guys is not enough. We can catch bad guys, but we want to stop bad shit from happening. You know? We got to stop these things from happening in the first place. You know? Not wait for... Think about it. You wait for a bank to be robbed, then you catch the bank robbers. That's the model. So Mueller said, no, we can't do that anymore. We're going to have to stop this stuff from happening. We have to get into national security. And that meant a lot more emphasis on intelligence gathering rather than making arrests. In the FBI, if you wanted to make your bones in the FBI, you arrested people. And you got convictions. If you want to collect intelligence, you often choose not to arrest somebody, right? So the question then became, whose behavior needs to change? And this is my area, is once you decide you're going to have a new strategy, whose behaviors need to change in order to implement the strategy? And in the FBI, the answer, the first and most important answer was agents, field agents. And so Harry Lane and I, Harry Lane is at Northeastern as well, we got involved in this program, which was designed to pull together intelligence people. And I didn't say intelligent, I mean intelligence gathering folks with agents and talk about how your world is going to be different if you're not necessarily arresting people all the time. The agents were very uncomfortable with that. By the way, this was not an easy transition for them to make.
Well, so how does that work? This is really interesting because obviously there are lots of, once you get large organizations, we'll talk about different categories of organizations in a minute maybe, but when you get a large organization, it seems to me there's a couple things that are interesting about change. One is that you have to do it on the fly. You don't get to shut down the FBI for a year and then come back.
There was some talk about that,
well,
but that didn't happen.
But let's say in principle you generally don't get to shut down. It's just like construction over a highway. You have to keep the highway going. So how does that happen? Do you meet with the chief agents from the different regions and you say, okay, we now have new performance criteria for your field agents. They're going to be measured by how much intelligence they gather, as much as by how many arrests they make. Is that how it begins, or how does that?
I'm a believer in when you're changing that in order to change an organization, here's the dilemma: you have to change it all at once, and you can't change it all at once. You know what I mean? Everything has to change, but it's impossible to change large, complex organizations all at once. So I'm a believer in what I would call piloting. You would call, I think, testing.
Yeah, or prototyping.
Prototyping.
And then
fair
testing,
enough. Yeah. Prototyping. That you pick an area, a smaller contained area, and you try to bring about some change within that area. Pick a region of the United States. And Boston, from what I understood in the FBI, was one of those very, what's the word I would want? Very sort of a vanguard place to look at how to bring about changes. You pick certain areas of the organization. You pick a store, you pick a retail operation, or you pick a region, and you bring about changes there. And some of what you said, I would say, is right, that you begin to change performance criteria. You also, by the way, change who you hire.
But you can't replace everybody that you've already
No. No, that's always one of the big challenges, is you've got a whole organization made up of people who are very good at doing what you don't want to do anymore. Now, that's an overstatement, folks. I didn't mean that literally, but you need to add new. All strategic change is competency destructive in some way. And that's part of the challenge. So you've got to teach people new competencies. You've got to bring people in with new competencies.
So if I had been a highly valued field agent in Boston, let's just say, of course, talking about Boston makes it more complicated for other reasons when we're talking about the FBI in the 90s. So let's.
But this was in the 90s. Yes, I agree with you. But this was in the 90s. So.
I don't know if they.
No, I don't. They may not know that story. Yeah.
Very interesting history. In any case, so suddenly agents who had been performing very well and getting top marks for arresting bank robbers, are suddenly second fiddle to this new cadre of 5 or 10 agents in an area who are getting all the kudos because they're excellent at intelligence gathering.
Well, of course, this was always, so there's tension. So you have tension. You know, you're uncomfortable. If you're uncomfortable with tension, get out of the strategic change business.
Right.
You're introducing tension into your organization. No question about it. Yeah. And, Boy, we had some real battles in these. I don't know if you guys know this, but we have a facility out in Ashland where we would bring the FBI folks to spend a couple of days, and man, we had some real knockdown dragouts about this very issue, about these agents who were very good at catching bank robbers, and why are we stopping? You know, here, so the FBI, the head guy comes out, not Mueller, but the second or third in command, I can't remember, and he asked the following question. See if you could think about this for a second. He said, how much money do you think, how many millions of dollars do you think gets lost in bank robberies every year? And I'm going to make up some numbers, but I'm getting the magnitude right. So let's say every year $173 million is stolen from banks. And he said, how much do you think we're spending every year to catch bank robbers? And it was many times that amount. Wow. Many times that amount. Wow. And he said, come on, guys. We don't need to be doing that anymore. And of course, somebody would be sitting right back there, raise his or her hand, and say, wait a second, are you saying we should let bank robbers go? And of course, the answer to that is no. We should be letting state police catch bank robbers. That statement alone was so countercultural to the FBI, you know, because we want to be catching the bank robbers. Right. So yeah, you're right. You're creating tension.
Yeah. Well, let's shift to, and I think this will be interesting to everybody. The difference, we talked about a few different kinds of organizations. A government organization like the FBI, higher education, which has its own structural issues with tenure and other things, and the corporate world. So, and we could break the corporate world down into, you know, big corporations and startups, but let's just say those three things. How would you approach managing change or designing for change differently in those different environments?
So what I love about working in corporate change is that there's a clear bottom line. Right. You know, you can't hide. You can for a little while hide from a bad bottom line, but ultimately there's a daily measure of how well you're doing. My most frustrating experiences have been in government because it's not always that clear. The metrics of performance are not always that clear. Okay. At the university level, you guys are living in a world of strategic change. I don't know what year you're in here, but let's say any juniors in the room. So when you enrolled at Northeastern University, we were ranked 63rd. I don't know, I'm making that up a little bit, but something like that. Now we're ranked 42nd. Rankings, you know, you can think of them as being artificial, but things have changed at Northeastern in order to bring about those ranking changes. Sure. And when we had a president who said, we're going to stop being a third-tier university and start being a top 100 university, he had to be very specific about what's going to change, who's going to change, and who the behaviors are. Now, you mentioned tenure, and of course, the reason people like to mention tenure is because that means you can't just fire people and hire new people in. But I think firing people and hiring new people in is one of the least effective change levers for any organization. No good business simply walks in and says, let's just get rid of all the old people and bring in new people. So to me, I guess my surprising answer is that they're not quite as different as we like to think they are.
Really?
That I've done some work with university presidents, and they'll say, well, you guys in the business world, somebody's not performing, if somebody's not doing what you want them to do, you fire them. And as I hear them say that, I'm thinking, what world are they living in? That's not the way business operates, for the most part.
Well, that's great. You had so anticipated my next question, which was, do most organizations change people or update skills of existing people?
So look, there's only two ways of getting people to change their behavior. So my bottom line is, if you're going to change a strategy, you've got to have to change people's behaviors to enact that strategy, okay? So there's only two ways to get people to change. One is you get them to adapt new behaviors, or the other is you get a new person in, all right? I say this in my class, I'll say it to you. If you can come up with a third way, let me know. We'll write a book and make $1 million. Because as far as I know, that's the only two options you've got. Every significant change effort that I have seen involves both. Okay? You're going to do some of each. I would always say start with trying to teach new skills and new behaviors. Start there. Give everybody a chance to bring about, to change their own behaviors in order to match your new strategy. If they can't or won't do it, then you might have to make another change.
Right, right.
Can't and won't, two different things. They may not have the capacity to do it. They may not have the interest to do it. So let me tell you a story. Can I tell you a story?
Sure, sure, sure.
I was consulting with a hotel chain, a very fancy hotel chain in the UK, Radisson Edwardian, in case if you've heard of them. But so the owner built this giant facility out at Heathrow, and they had been a small boutique hotel chain, and then he built this giant facility. Why he did this, who knows? But big conference center, big convention center, and the question was, if we're going to run a convention center, a big hotel convention center, how is that different from running a small boutique? So I got involved in working with the top executives to say, what's the difference between running a hotel as a convention center and running hotels? And just to give you one very simple example, in a boutique, if George is in a room, you know, he's had a nice night out of town in London, and he says, and I'd like a cup of coffee before a cup of tea, I'm sorry, before I go to bed. He calls down and says, can I get a cup of tea? Sure, no problem, George, we'll bring it up in 5 minutes. They bring it up in 7 minutes. George ain't going to complain. He's happy, you know. You have 150 people, 200 people in a meeting. You break at 10:15, and the tea doesn't show up until 10:17. Deep crisis, right? And so the level of coordination, it becomes much more of a command and control operation. And we went through a week of sort of parsing all this out. And at the end of the week, I had 3 people come up to me and say, Bert, you know what? I'm going to quit. Not out of anger, but out of saying, this is not what I signed up for. This is not the world that I want to live in. Now, all of these people had options elsewhere. You know, so in that sense, it was win-win. But you do want, these were people who I probably could have made the change, but decided they didn't want to. So there's always going to be some of it, George. Always going to be some of it. Can't be helped, I think.
Right. Well, it is interesting, and by the way, you guys should take note. It is very true that you are at an institution that is so much more comfortable with change than almost any university that I know of, simply because change has proved, almost without exception over the last 15 or 20 years, to yield better results every time. And so that even the people who might have opposed the evolution of the institution tend to look back now and say, well, gosh, it really worked out. And this is not true at a lot of universities, I would say.
No, we used to, when I first came here, it's a long time ago, guys. So.
Let's leave it at that. Right?
Yeah. We had an open enrollment policy. Anybody could get in to Northeastern, believe it or not. Anybody could get in. But not anybody could be successful. And I remember going to my first in business. Those of you who are in business, the first course you take is in those days was accounting. These days we have something called Introduction to Business. You took accounting, and the accounting professors loved to say, "We fail half the students." Can you imagine that? I mean, you couldn't do that today, right? You'd be thrown out of the university if you said that today, and rightly so. So we had to figure out how we dealt with students differently. Now, we got different kinds of, luckily, we got different kinds of students as well. So you have to begin to think about, if my job is to retain you, why do I want to retain you, by the way? First of all, I like you all. You seem like nice folks. But also, you know, we get measured for retaining. And so we want it. So how do I have to be different as a faculty person? How do we have to be different as the residence people? How do they have to respond to you differently? So it really makes a difference in how everybody in the organization works and interacts with each other and with the customer, the student.
Yeah. Well, actually, this is a great point, and it's so relevant because, I manage a lot of faculty members in my job, and one of the things that we talk about, this ties to this key value in this course called empathy, which is our job is to make it as possible as we can for you to succeed. So we have to look at the world from your point of view, not only from our point of view. The accounting professor that you were describing, Lowe, those many years ago, was looking at his or her own sense of worth by how many students he or she could fail, which is a perverse and perhaps even absurd way of looking at the world, but it is certainly one that was not uncommon. I don't think just him.
I can't remember his or her, but in his defense, that was the strategy of the school in those days. But we had a president who said, we're not going to have that strategy.
Right. Well, let's shift gears a little bit back to companies, and I want to ask you about some more specific kinds of organizations.
Yeah.
So, what companies do you see today as being in the midst of great change?
Oh, well, I mentioned in my lecture Amazon. And one of the things that impresses me now, you always have to be a little careful about Amazon, because let's be clear about one thing: Amazon loses money every flippin' year.
I've heard this.
Yeah, so we have to be a little careful. Is this really the model we want to follow? I don't know, but investors like it because they feel once 100% of the world is their customer, they'll make money. But they're constantly innovating. You and I were talking before class about this series on Netflix called
House of Cards.
So Netflix getting into the content production business. I mean, that wasn't their business when they started. They were buying content from content providers. There's a distinction in those days between content providers and content creators. Completely different. Now Netflix is quite innovative about getting into that business. So I'm quite impressed with Netflix's ability to constantly innovate. Dunkin Donuts? I mean, this is donuts, folks. I mean, this is, but nonetheless, I think we'd have to say that they have shown some fleetness in moving away from donuts. 8% of the market is donuts. That's it. And their coladas and their iced coffees and their sandwiches. So they have been pretty fleet.
And new markets. I think they're on the West Coast now, which is new for them.
We'll see how that works.
Yeah. Well, who knows?
Yeah. Right.
Let's stick back with this whole. I mean, you've been segueing right into the same topics that I thought of, and that is that cable TV, internet provider, web-hosted services marketplace is a kind of continuum that used to be composed of discrete entities when they were solving one problem, like how do I get cable television to my house? We both are old enough to remember when you watched television when I was a kid. I promise I won't bore you with this, but because your parents have already told you this, it was a fuzzy black and white thing that you were fussing with the antenna all the time. And for now 20 years or 25 years, there's been crisp, perfect picture coming in through your cable, and that was for television. Now for the last 15 or 20 years, that cable also provides high-speed internet connection. But now that it does that, it means that the distinction between the content provider or selling unit and the means of the selling is blurring.
Look, we're gonna figure out who's fleet and who's not, because those who are not fleet in this business won't last long. Did you see this just this morning? HBO they're not leaving cable, but they're offering a non-cable alternative.
Yeah, this is a big thing for the cable companies.
Yeah, and so the cable companies have to respond. I love looking at as a college professor, I love bookstores, and so I love, in a sad way, looking at what's happened to the big bookstores. But then every once in a while you read about these small bookstores that are doing great business. Ann Patchett, the author who was here a couple of years ago, has been very successful in running a small boutique
in Nashville, I think.
Yeah. So we love those stories of company. I know everybody thinks about Apple and they think about all these high-tech companies, and that's fine. I got nothing against any of those companies, but I sort of like the old, what are they, the old industries where you see some real exciting things going on.
Well, I would say, would you agree that certainly in architecture, but I think in a lot of these industries, the things that are going to succeed and continue to succeed are at either end of the spectrum. The giant, scalable enterprise that thrives on incredible efficiency, or the small, local thing that is, so unique that it can't be replicated on, in a sort of.
The trouble with the small, unique thing is it does have to scale at some point. It's going to have to get bigger.
Unless it's a bed and breakfast.
You're right. No, I mean, like Ann Patchett's bookstore does not have to get bigger. I understand that.
Right.
But so many of these do have to, that you do need some scale to get the benefits of economies of scale and scope and all that stuff. So it's always a challenge. I mean, if you guys, I'll bet half the people in this room, when they graduate, are going to start their own business. Maybe not half, maybe a fourth. But one or two of you will start your own business.
I like the earlier.
So a half. At some point you're going to face that challenge. If you're successful, is now what? Mm-hmm. What's next? Is this sustainable? Is it scalable? Where do we go next? Mm-hmm. And of course, what happens, as you know, is that if you're successful, some big corporation is going to try to buy you, and you're going to say, "I can make a lot of money selling this sucker, but I'm not sure what's going to happen to my dream." You can also say, "I've got so many dreams. Right. Let them take this one. I got another dream to move to. This is what I really do well. I dream well." Right. Those are your choices. George and I. Well, let me rephrase that. I'm sort of here. I don't have to make that choice. Right. I'm not going out into the world of business. I'm teaching about it. I'm studying it. So I don't know, George, if I quite agree with that's the model. It's either one or the other, because I think there are times when they might come together.
Well, in the architecture world, it is the case that these big companies, these big architecture and engineering companies, very big ones, names like Stantec, are buying the mid-sized architecture and design firms in cities around the country. And then the only thing that's left then
the small boutique ones.
Is the small boutique ones that can solve your discrete problem where you need to have lots of face-to-face time with the design principal, and you don't want to be, managed by a global.
Yeah. I don't mean to be cynical, but I teach in the high-tech MBA program here, and so many of these students have gone that small boutique route, and then you need money, you need capital, And so some big company comes in offers to buy them, and they say, "Don't worry, we'll leave you alone. You can pursue your dream. You can do," and that lasts 6 months. And so they come to class. They're just so cynical. Why did they buy us if they just wanted us to be like them? So there's a struggle. I like your idea. I like to think it's true, but let's realize that that's a real struggle in the business world.
Right. Well, the reason that people aren't buying the little boutique ones is that they obviously don't have the scale. I'm talking about in the design world. They don't have the scalable nature that some of these other businesses, like high-tech businesses, would have. I.e., you have a great idea.
If you have a little, that's right. In the high-tech world, if you have a little product, it can become a big product.
Correct. Whereas the time-based obsessions of architects are not necessarily scalable in the same way. Let's shift gears a little to change and the built environment. We had a guest from IDEO, this design consulting firm I was talking to you about before, and we are actually going to be doing, at the school next year, we're going to be doing collaboration with Stanford University on how the changing landscape of innovative companies and the way people work is changing the real estate that they use. In other words, if the standard office building that got developed sort of in the post-war world, a circulation core in the middle, 45 feet to the perimeter, so you get daylighting and a very flexible plan, that is now giving way to new models of how people work. And I wonder if in your working with companies on change, any of that has had an element of the built environment in it.
So can I plead ignorance? Is that all right in front of students?
I think it is.
I don't
think
know.
it is.
Because all right, so here's
That's not what you do.
It's not what I get paid to do. But you know what I'm saying? I don't know the answer to that question.
Okay.
I have not seen it, but man, I hate to say that it's not happening. Just because I haven't seen it happening, I don't know.
Well, so for example, if you go over to Kendall Square today,
Yeah.
and you go to the headquarters
I can find Kendall
of
Square.
Google, or the Apple presence over there, or any of these companies,
They're going to look different.
Yeah, they really look different from, let's say, just to be extreme about it, they really look different from, Hartford Insurance, circa 1960, with a bunch of men in white shirts and dark jackets all sitting in rows at desks or in fixed offices. They have the idea of collaboration, the idea of spontaneous meeting trying to become part of the
You hear about that a lot, and I assume that's happening. I'm reading a book right now, those of you who are interested in this stuff, called Cubed, C-U-B-E-D, which is essentially about, not quite this, but it's about how the office design of today really reflects essentially the 19th century industrial realities. And presumably, therefore, that needs to change. And the notion of collaborative space, you certainly see that.
Right.
I mean, that you certainly see. How real that is, I'm just skeptical. I'm not skeptical, but is that right? Is that right? I am skeptical. I'm dubious.
You are skeptical, but it's interesting because there really are two forces at work here. One is saying, well, we work and collaborate in fundamentally different ways than we used to. It used to be I was your boss, I would come and I would give you an assignment for you to work at your desk and report back to me, let's say at the end of the week.
Yeah.
And close your door and knock it out, do the analysis.
Sure.
And in a lot of these businesses, I'll just take IDEO because they're so clearly not that kind of company. You've got an MBA, a graphic designer, and a coder, computer coder, sitting around a table brainstorming and working on something together.
So, folks, have you last time you went to visit a professor? Now, I'm not talking about me or my department, but you go into other departments, and do you see a bunch of professors sitting around tables collaborating? I don't, except for my department.
Of course.
I don't. I see everybody sitting in their offices, working on their flipping computers. Now, they may be collaborating. And by the way, this is the interesting thing. They may very well be collaborating, but they're collaborating with people in Singapore. I collaborate with a guy in London. So I don't know.
Well, this is what I was going to say. The other force, the two forces in this debate are, on the one hand, maybe new modes of collaboration, and I think the university is, ironically, and despite our best leadership efforts to make things more interdisciplinary,
we're not very good at it.
To induce. Lots of people become college professors precisely to be autonomous.
Leave us alone.
And so it's kind of running at cross purposes there. Similarly, in law firms, for example, there is a real sense of hierarchy that is expressed in the size and location of offices, and that if you don't have a corner office with a big, with a big conference table, how do you distinguish the managing partner from the intern? And so there are a lot of things at work in those kinds of design issues, and
So the question is, I guess, and this is something for you guys to understand better than I do, is does the physical design drive behaviors, or do new behaviors drive a need for new design? I'll admit, George, I am a behavioralist. If I'm going in to change an organization, to help change an organization, I'm going to look at behaviors first, not physical space.
Well, you will practice empathy. You will try to understand. I know that sounds like too squishy a word for a business professor.
I'm not against empathy.
But you will try to understand.
I'm getting a little tired of you, but I'm not against empathy.
No longer empathizing.
That's right. I'm not against empathy.
But you will try to understand how the behavior, why the behaviors are the way they are.
That's right.
Let's say.
You have to. Yeah. That's right. What motivates people to alter their behaviors? That's right.
Well, and as the great Winston Churchill famously said, we make our cities, and the rest of the time, our cities make us.
I'm well aware of the other arguments that that you're going to get different things happening in Cambridge, Massachusetts than you will in other towns because people literally are physically together. I get, I'm aware of that. But within a single business, I just haven't seen physical change driving behavior.
Right. Well, this will be what is going to make this year-long study we're going to do with Stanford here next year so interesting, is to really try to get into that issue. I don't think anybody is under the illusion that, that the space will completely drive behavior. But that the reciprocity between
you want
those
reciprocity,
two
you want mutuality, reciprocal.
I think it'll be interesting.
Sure.
And sort of the reason this issue needs to be addressed is that the real estate industry, especially out around Palo Alto, is realizing that the traditional prototype, and a lot of the folks in this room may not realize how standardized office space is in this country. It's a really formulaic thing. So that when the forces of the environment are, that is the workplace environment, are changing so much that they're starting to alter that one-size-fits-all approach to office space, that's interesting. And that's a scalable issue for us to address. It's not a one-off, it's a scalable.
I'll come back next year when I finish reading this book and we can talk about, because I'm sure there's something here to this.
Yeah. Well, I think it'll be interesting.
Yeah.
I want to get to one more sort of thematic topic, but please get ready with your questions either in person or via.
By the way, I want you to know I was going to bring everybody a donut, and I was told that you can't bring donuts into the Black Museum. Is that true?
I don't know who told you that, because that is just an outrage.
That seems outrageous. But
whoever would have said such a thing.
But I'm not mentioning any names. But no, apparently they don't allow food here.
Isn't that crazy?
That is a little nutty.
Yeah, I think
especially
you should be able to eat messy food in any auditorium. That's certainly what I want to sit in. Moving on, I just wanted to shift. We've talked a lot about organizations, the behavior of organizations, organizational change, strategy. I wonder if you, and I may be off base here, right? But I wonder if you also end up talking with some of these organizations about the individuals themselves. In other words, It seems to me this change is also about us. It's not only about you being a student at Northeastern, it's about how is this impacting you, or what about you needs to change. Certainly, every member of the workforce is going to have to learn to adapt and retool. Does your work spread into that area as well? Do you talk with...
No, other than recognizing that that's true.
Right.
I mean, I can't say that what I've ever done individual counseling.
Right.
What happens is people will come up to me and say, you know what I've learned about myself in the last hour?
Right.
I just had that happen working with a company over the summer, where he said, I realize I'm trying to get people who work for me to be collaborative, but I'm probably spending too much time telling them to be collaborative. Mm-hmm. Rather than give. So you hope for opportunities for insight, individual insight. But I'm sure there's a role for people to help individuals understand that. But I'm much more at a strategic level, and trying to change context first, and then then people need to figure out how to fit into the context.
Well, my experience is much more limited to the organization that I'm nominally in charge of, and I have to tell you, I find that talking explicitly about the ways that I am changing, the ways that I am doing things differently than I did before, measuring myself against different metrics, is actually proves to be very helpful. It opens up people who might otherwise be resistant to change.
So we call that, we have a term for that, we call that modeling. That is to say, when people in hierarchical positions start behaving in different ways, we know that will have an impact on how other people behave. We know that. So, of course. And that's why it's so important for this kid. And to me, he was a kid, came up to me after class and said, I realize that I'm being too directive about being collaborative. And as long as he's directive, he's not, you can't tell people to be collaborative. Well, you can, but it's not going to get you anywhere.
Right.
You have to be collaborative yourself. And create opportunities where being collaborative is helpful to other people. Right. So I think you're certainly right on target. I have occasionally gotten into working with a top management team and talking about how their behaviors are reflecting exactly the opposite of what they're trying to convey to the organization. That's really fascinating work. People who sit at the top of organizations tend to believe, for no good reason, that their behaviors are invisible.
Right.
I think it's just denial. There's no other reason.
They say things like, "Be nice, damn it."
Yeah.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
You know, or they can't agree on anything themselves, but then they go out and pretend like we're in full agreement on this, and everybody sees that they're not.
Right.
You know, when you're sitting at the top of an organization, your behaviors are highly visible, and people will learn from them. If nothing else, what they'll learn is, if I want to get up there, that better be how I behave.
Mm-hmm. Now, that would be the best. That would be the best style, I suppose. Is that the people who work for you aspire to.
That's a good thing, right? It's a good thing. It's a good thing for people to want to move up, of course.
Yeah.
But so then they make all sorts of guesses in many organizations. What does it take to move up?
Yeah.
So the FBI, going back to the FBI. This tape isn't on, by the way. So, you won't. So you know, they still say, look, it's still the guys with guns who catch bank robbers who are moving up in this organization.
Right.
That, you know, all this other talk, maybe it's not as important as we thought it was. You have to be careful about that. Just have to be careful about that.
Okay, Kate, do we have some questions?
Are they really texting you questions? Is that what they're doing?
They're doing it over Twitter because, you know.
They're tweeting.
They're tweeting questions is what they're doing.
Right. So these will be short questions.
How has Dunkin's business plan and design evolved over time to incorporate challenges from competitors like Starbucks?
Coffee. So Starbucks, by the way, the #1 seller of coffee in the United States. Does anybody know who it is? It is not Dunkin', and it is not Starbucks.
It's got to be McDonald's.
It's got to be McDonald's, and it is McDonald's. So, but nonetheless, I think everybody knows that when Starbucks came with its challenge, one of its challenges was espresso, which is a completely different technology than brewed coffee. It's a one-off technology, right? So did Dunkin Donuts sell espresso? Not right away. They waited until they had this machine for which the entire skill required of using that machine is oh, here's espresso. Right. Now I can make you an espresso drink. So they automated it, in other words. So they took on Starbucks with technology, #1. #2, I don't know if you may not remember this, but maybe 5 years ago, Mr. Schultz, who runs Starbucks, decided his company had lost its way. Overexpanded, lost its way. He shut down his entire chain for an afternoon. Anybody remember that? To retrain, he did closed-circuit TV, retraining everybody in Starbucks all at once. During that afternoon, Dunkin' Donuts gave away free coffee. So they took on Starbucks directly by doing that. Now, McDonald's ran. Maybe they still run it. They have an advertising campaign where they make fun of Starbucks. Has anybody seen that? Where a couple of guys are sitting around with black turtlenecks and berets and blah 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 blah, and they finally say, "Let's go to McDonald's and get a real cup of coffee."
Right.
So that's a marketing technique. But I would say Dunkin' Donuts has taken on Starbucks and taken on Starbucks mainly through technology.
That's great.
Starbucks, all Starbucks employees most are full time. All Dunkin' Donuts employees, most, again, part-time, okay? Full-time, you can train, you can teach them skills. Part-time, you don't invest in them for lots of good and bad reasons. But, so they weren't going to have espresso until they could get
Right.
Now, the irony, by the way, go to Starbucks, how do they make espresso these days?
Same way?
Same way.
Yeah.
Same way. I don't know, did I answer that?
Yeah.
Did I answer the question? Go ahead, Kate, you got another one?
How can a company prototype their business strategy without putting it into practice and risk financial damage?
Well, who said you can't? Who said you have to avoid risk? I mean, who thinks you have to avoid risk to run a business? Of course, there's risk. Of course, there's risk. The change. Here's my basic philosophy of prototyping: is go where you're most likely to be successful first. You know, if Dunkin wants to prototype a sit-down, comfortable store, which they have now, by the way, they have some. Don't go. I don't want to be insulting about this. Don't go to Des Moines, Iowa. Go to San Francisco or Boston. Go where you're most likely to be successful first. If the FBI wants to promote a greater integration between law enforcement and intelligence, go to Boston, go to New York first. So if you want to avoid risk, don't go into business. But I think that does narrow the risk a bit, is to go where you're most likely to be successful first. Nothing succeeds in business like success. Everybody will look at you and say, oh, that worked. I can try that. Now, you know, I told you the story of the hotel chain building. That is exactly not what I would recommend doing. He did it anyway. But
Going to making a giant
Making a giant leap.
giant change in scale.
Yeah, overnight. And then saying, how the hell do we do it? Right. This was a private business, so I guess he could do what he wanted to do.
If Dunkin' Donuts had donuts in their current logo, do you think it would help or hurt their business?
No, I think the question, in all due respect, the question has it wrong. The logo doesn't drive the sales. The logo represents what they're already selling. So they changed the logo because they were trying to sell more coffee. Okay? So, you could say that the logo and the design of the stores is all designed to represent coffee. So I guess the specific answer to that question is no, I don't think having a donut in their logo would hurt them. Okay? But let's be clear, they don't want to be selling a lot of donuts.
So it wouldn't as clearly represent the strategy.
That's all. It wouldn't be as well designed in that regard. It wouldn't be. Another way of saying well designed maybe would be consistent, systematic. You know, it all fits together. They tell me, they even painted the store. What color are the stores now? The brown and orange. And I am told that the marketing people there thought those colors represented coffee. Do they? I don't know. But brown does. I don't know what the orange part of it is. So no, I think the logo is representative of what they're selling, not driving what they're selling.
Well, this is a great point about how, you know, we've had different people. You and Mark Meyer are the most directly business-oriented people we've had, but we've had branding and positioning people, we've had communication people. Actually, the strategy is the common theme in all these things. Sometimes it's about representing it, sometimes it's about communicating it, sometimes, as you say, it's about implementing it. And I think it's important to understand that these different types of guests are not so, they're just, they live on different spots on this continuum.
That could be. I think
that's true.
All right, so I'm going to change my answer. It might help.
Kate, one more?
How do you or can you implement the design process into the business curriculum? Are there contradictions in both areas, and if so, how do you adapt to that?
Well, I didn't follow the question. Where are the contradictions in both areas into the business curriculum?
So the question is, how can one integrate design or design thinking? I'm going to clarify into a business school curriculum. Does it happen now, or if it doesn't?
No. Look. Not really. What happens in the business, I'm sure, by the way, this happens everywhere, is those of you who are business students, you'll know this. You take accounting, you take marketing, you take finance, you take blah, blah. All really important stuff, right? And then the last semester of your life here, you take me. And it's my job to integrate all of it. Well, that's a step in the right direction. Not because it's me, by the way, but because you've had the basics, and now and now you integrate. It's better than simply giving you all the basics and saying, no, it's your job to pull it all together. Could we do better? We are working on it. We are working on it. And the way we are working on it in the business school is we offer now an integrative course in the first semester. And here's the idea. I'm sure the people in the room have taken it, so you can tell me whether it works or not, is we start by integrating. We don't start by differentiating.
Right,
we start by integrating, then we differentiate, then we integrate again.
Right.
So the first year, I think the big projects this year are TJX. You study TJ, you come up with an integrated plan for TJX, you present to people, they're a great company, they come and they listen to your, and then you go off and you learn the sub-disciplines, and then you come back at the end and sort of integrate it again. Right. Is that perfect? Is that ideal? I don't know, probably not, but we're working on it, you know? I think we do recognize the integration challenge.
I think
I hope we're doing it.
I think implicit in that question is, or I'm going to read into that question, that maybe that design and learning how to design is actually another way to integrate, and might be, in other words, it's another, let's say, another way of thinking about it, because all design is about synthesis and integration of disparate parts. And, you know, as I like to say, design is about trying to make it look like you did something on purpose, that it didn't just end up that way because you did some accounting and then you did some finance and then it just ended up like this. I think that's maybe what's
all right, if that's what it means, we have a long way to go. We have a long way to go. But I think being invited to this kind of a session, I mean, I never thought of design in terms of strategy before I got an email from George. So, you know, living on a university is a real opportunity to see the world differently, and I hope all of you are taking advantage of it. Because as a faculty person, I try to take advantage of it. And being forced, quote unquote, to think about how to present my material to people like you who are interested in design, well, that made me think a little bit differently than I would have otherwise. Yeah. Absolutely, absolutely. So I'm hoping you guys take advantage of the fact that you live at a university here. Not at a college of A or B, not just a college of A or B, but you live at a university. And this experience, the opportunities for experience, these are not going to present themselves very often in your lives.
Well, I think that's an excellent note on which to end, and I want to thank you.
Was that an optimistic note? Try to be positive, right?
All right.
Thank you all. Thank you.
Thanks very much.